I saw your name today. She said it like it was something we both understood. I was sitting in my car when the call came in. Didn't recognize the number at first. Almost didn't answer. What do you mean? I asked. There was a small pause. Then she said, on a billboard, near the highway, your company's campaign, your name was right there. I didn't say anything, because I knew exactly which one she meant. It had gone up 3 days earlier. Large format. Main road. The kind of placement you don't get unless things are working. I figure I should call, she added. Like 5 years was a reasonable gap between conversations. I leaned back in the seat, looked through the windshield, and the only thing I could think about wasn't the billboard. It was the month everything fell apart. That's where this starts. Before that call, before the billboard, you need to understand what that month actually looked like. Because it wasn't just one thing collapsing. It was everything that had been holding itself together, just enough finally giving way. The business didn't fail all at once. It slowed first, subtly. Payments coming in later than expected. Clients asking for extensions. Projects stretching longer than they should have. At first, I thought it was temporary. Something I could adjust around. I remember sitting at my desk one Tuesday morning around 9:20, looking at 3 invoices that hadn't been paid yet. Same clients who had always been consistent. I called one of them. He answered quickly. Hey, I said, just checking on that invoice from last month. There was a pause. Then he said, yeah, we're restructuring some things on our end. It might take a bit longer. How long? I asked. Hard to say. Maybe a few weeks. I said, all right. Hung up. Then looked at the other 2. Same situation. Different explanations. Same result. Money that was supposed to be there wasn't. Over the next few weeks, it got tighter. Not dramatic. Just narrower. Every decision mattered more. Every expense had to be justified. I cut what I could. Delayed what I couldn't. Try to keep everything moving. Because that's what you do when you're still inside it. You don't step back and say, this is failing. You adjust. You push. You assume there's a version of it that still works. I didn't talk about it much. Not with her. Not with anyone. Not because I was hiding it. Because I didn't have a clear version of it yet. Just pieces. Numbers that didn't add up the way they used to. I remember one evening, around 11 p.m., sitting at the kitchen table with my laptop open, going through projections, reworking them, trying to make them hold. She was sitting across from me, scrolling through her phone. At one point, she looked up and said, "You've been doing this every night." I nodded, just figuring a few things out. She watched me for a second, then said, "Is everything okay?" I paused, not because I didn't know the answer, because I didn't know how to explain it simply. "It's tighter than I expected," I said. She nodded slowly. "Okay," then went back to her phone. No follow-up, no questions, just acknowledgement. At the time, I didn't think much of that. It didn't feel like distance, just a conversation that ended early. If you've ever been in a situation where something is starting to slip, but not enough to call it out completely, you know how easy it is to keep things at the surface. If that sounds familiar, you'll want to stay with this, because that surface doesn't hold for long. By the end of that month, the numbers stopped working. Not in a way I could adjust, in a way that required a decision. I sat in the same chair, same table, around 8:40 p.m. and closed the laptop. Didn't open it again that night, because I already knew there wasn't a version of the current structure that would recover. Not without capital I didn't have. Not without time I couldn't extend. The next day, I started shutting things down. Not publicly, not dramatically, just step by step. Ending contracts, letting people go, closing accounts, each one small. Together, final. I told her that evening. We were sitting in the living room. No television, just quiet. "I'm going to have to close it," I said. She didn't react immediately, just looked at me, then asked, "Are you sure?" "Yes." Another pause. Then she said, "So what happens now?" "I rebuild," I said. It came out simply, because that part was already decided. She nodded, didn't say anything else for a few seconds, then said, "Okay." That was the entire conversation. At the time, it felt contained, not supportive, not negative, just neutral. But that changed quickly, within 2 weeks. Not gradually, clearly, We were sitting in the same living room. Same space. Different tone. She said, "I've been thinking about things." I nodded. "Okay." She looked at me directly. "I need stability," she said. No hesitation. No softening. "I need someone who has a plan," she added. I didn't interrupt, because I understood where it was going. "And right now, you're starting over." I nodded once. "Yes." There was a pause. Then she said it clearly. "I don't think I can do that again." Again. That word stayed for a second, like it needed to land properly. I didn't argue. Didn't try to explain anything differently. Because this wasn't about misunderstanding. It was about alignment, or the lack of it. She stood up shortly after, walked to the bedroom, started packing a few things. Not everything, just enough. I sat there, not moving, not reacting, just watching it happen, because the timing made it clear. This wasn't separate from what had just happened. It was directly connected to it. And as I sat there, listening to the sound of a suitcase being zipped in the next room, I understood something without needing it explained. She wasn't leaving me. She was leaving what I had represented, and that had already changed. She didn't leave that night. Not immediately. She packed a few things, zipped the suitcase, and left it by the door. Then she came back into the living room and sat down, like there was still a version of the evening that could continue normally. "Not tonight," she said. I nodded. "Okay." We sat there for a few minutes. No conversation. No attempt to soften anything that had already been said. Then she stood up again. "I'll leave in the morning." All right, that was it. No argument. No negotiation. Just a timeline. The next morning, she left at 8:15. I remember the time because I was already awake, sitting at the kitchen table. Same spot. Coffee in front of me I hadn't touched. She came out of the bedroom with the suitcase, paused near the door, looked at me, like there was something she was considering saying, then didn't. "Take care of yourself," she said instead. "I will." She nodded once, opened the door, and left. No hesitation. No looking back. I sat there for a while after that, not thinking about what I could have said differently. Because there wasn't anything. Everything had already been made clear, and the timing had made it clearer. The business failed. She left. Not months later. Not after trying to adjust. Within weeks. That mattered. More than anything she said. The next few weeks were quiet. Not empty. Just quiet. I didn't talk about it much. Not the business. Not the relationship. There wasn't anything to explain yet. Just a series of things that had ended. I focused on what needed to be handled. Closing accounts. Responding to emails. Finalizing what was left. I remember sitting at my desk one afternoon around 2:40, going through a list of outstanding items, crossing them off one by one, each one small, together complete. There was no moment where it felt finished, just a point where there was nothing left to do. After that, the silence shifted. Not heavy, just open. That's when the rebuilding started. Not as a decision, as a default. I didn't sit down and say, "I'm starting again." I just started moving. Early mornings, late nights, same structure as before. Different mindset, less expectation, more focus on what was directly in front of me. No one was watching this version. There was no visibility, no momentum, just work. I took smaller contracts, short-term projects, anything that kept things moving. Not impressive, but stable enough to build from. I didn't talk about it, didn't need to, because there wasn't anything to present yet. Just progress. Slow, consistent. Over time, it started to take shape again. Not like the first version. More structured, more deliberate. I wasn't trying to recreate what had failed. I was building something that wouldn't depend on the same things. Different clients, different model, less risk in any single point. It took time, months that didn't feel like they were adding up to anything. Then one day they did. A contract that held, then another, then a third that connected to something larger. I remember signing one of them around 10:15 a.m. on a Thursday, sitting at a small desk in an office that wasn't permanent yet, looking at the number. Not large, but enough. Enough to confirm that it was working. I leaned back in the chair. Didn't celebrate. Just acknowledged it. Because that's how it felt. Not like a comeback. Like progress. Years passed like that. No big announcement. No moment where everything changed at once. Just steady movement forward. Until eventually, the work started to show up in places that mattered. Campaigns, partnerships, projects that had visibility. The kind of things people notice even if they don't know the details behind them. I didn't think about her during any of that. Not when things improved. Not when things stabilized. Not even when they started to succeed. Because she had been part of a different version. A version that no longer existed. Then, 5 years later, my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer. Then I did. And the first thing she said was, "I saw your name today." For a second, I didn't respond. Not because I was surprised. Because I was placing her voice. It had been 5 years. Long enough that it should have felt unfamiliar. It didn't. "How are you?" she asked. The tone was easy. Not cautious. Not careful. Just familiar. "I'm good," I said. "You sound good." "I am." There was a pause. Not long. Just enough for her to decide how to move the conversation forward. Then she said, "That billboard." I had to look twice. I leaned back in the seat. Rested my arm on the door. "It's part of the campaign we're running," I said. "It didn't look like something small," she said. "That placement, that's expensive." "It's a main route," I said. "High traffic." She let out a small breath. Wow. I could hear something shift in her tone. Not admiration exactly. More like recalibration. She was adjusting her understanding in real time. "That's amazing," she added. "Thanks." Another pause. Then she said, "I always knew you would figure out." That sentence stayed there for a second. I didn't respond to it, because it didn't connect to anything real. She filled the silence. "I mean, even back then, you were always working towards something." I looked out through the windshield. A car passed slowly in front of me. Turned left. "Gone." I said. "And now," she added, "it looks like everything came together." Eventually, she laughed lightly. "I guess I just called to say, it's good to see that. I appreciate it." The conversation moved, but it didn't deepen. It stayed at the surface. Controlled. Measured. Then she asked, "Are you still in the same place?" "No." "Oh, where are you now?" I gave her the area. She repeated it quietly. "Nice." Then, "Do you like it?" "Yes." I didn't add anything. Didn't describe it. Didn't expand. Because the conversation didn't require detail. It required distance. She tried again. "So, what have you been up to besides all of that?" The question sounded casual. It wasn't. It was looking for an opening. I answered the same way. "Working," I said. "Building things out." She laughed again. "You always did that." I didn't respond. Because that version of me, the one she was referring to, was the same one she had decided wasn't stable enough. 5 years ago. She kept going. "I've been doing a few different things," she said. I let her talk. She mentioned a role. A move. Something about traveling for a while. Then she paused. "And I've been thinking about slowing things down a bit." I nodded. "Sound good." It didn't connect to anything. Not for me. She noticed that. I could hear it in the next pause. Slightly longer. Less certain. Then she said, "It's just funny how things come back around." I didn't respond to that either. Because nothing had come back around. It had moved forward. Without her. She adjusted again. "So," she said, "maybe we should catch up properly sometime." There it was. Not direct, but clear enough. I looked straight ahead. At the road. At the reflection of the dashboard in the windshield. And I checked something. Not consciously. Just automatically. There was no reaction. No hesitation. No sense of reopening anything. Just recognition of what this was and what it wasn't. I said, "I'm pretty busy right now." No explanation. No apology. Just accurate. She paused. "Right," she said. "I understand." Another silence. This one slightly heavier. Not uncomfortable. Just more real. Then she said, "Oh, it was really good hearing your voice." "You too," I said. And I meant it. Not because it meant anything. Because it didn't. Then she added, "I'm really happy things worked out for you." I nodded once. "Take care," I said. "You too." The line disconnected. I lowered the phone. Set it on the passenger seat. Didn't check it again. Didn't look at the number. Didn't think about saving it. I started the car. Pulled out into the street. The billboard was 2 blocks ahead. I passed it without slowing down. Didn't look up, because I already knew it was there. And I realized something as I drove past it. She hadn't called because she missed me. She called because she recognized what I had become. And she wanted to see if that version of me still had space for her. It didn't. I didn't think about the call again that day. Not while I drove. Not when I got back to the office. Not even when I passed the billboard again later that evening. It stayed where it happened. Inside the car. Contained. That was different. A few years earlier, something like that would have stayed with me. I would have replayed parts of the conversation. Adjusted my answers. Thought about what I could have said differently. This time, there was none of that. Because there was nothing unresolved. That part was already settled. 5 years earlier. I got back to the office around 4:10. Walked in. Same layout. Same movement. 2 people at the front desk. One on a call in the meeting room. Normal pace. I dropped my keys on the desk. Opened my laptop. Went through emails. Answered what needed to be answered. Scheduled 2 calls. Reviewed a proposal. Nothing slowed down. Nothing shifted. At one point, Daniel walked in. "Hey," he said. "Hey." He leaned against the door frame for a second. "You see it yet?" he asked. "What?" "The second billboard. Other side of the highway." I shook my head. "No." He nodded. "It went up this morning." "All right." He paused. Then said, "It's getting attention." I know. That was the entire conversation. He didn't ask about the call. I didn't mention it. Because it didn't need to be shared in that space. It wasn't relevant to anything we were doing. That mattered. Around 6:30, I closed the laptop. Packed up. Walked out. The day had been normal. Completely. That was the part one noticed most. Nothing about that call had disrupted anything. Not my work. Not my focus. Not my direction. It had just happened. And then it had passed. When I got home, Sarah was already there. Standing in the kitchen. Cutting something at the counter. "Hey," she said without turning. "Hey." I set my bag down. Walked over. Poured a glass of water. She glanced at me. "You're a little later than usual." "Traffic." She nodded. That was enough. We stood there for a minute. No urgency in the conversation. No need to fill space. Then I said, "I got a call earlier." She didn't stop what she was doing. "Yeah." "From someone I used to know." She gave a small nod. "Okay." I took a sip of water. Set the glass down. She saw the billboard. I added. That made her look up. "Who?" I said her name. Not dramatically. Just clearly. Sarah paused for a second. Then said, "That's interesting." "It is." She went back to what she was doing. "Why did she call?" she asked. "To catch up." Sarah gave a small smile. "Of course she did." I nodded. We let that sit for a moment. Then she asked, "How was it?" "Short," I said. "Easy." She looked at me again. And that was it. She held my gaze for a second longer than before. Then nodded. "All right." No follow-up questions. No need to analyze it. Because she understood something immediately. It didn't matter. That was the point. We moved on. Dinner. Conversation. Small plans for the weekend. Normal rhythm. Nothing interrupted. Nothing carried over. At one point, she said, "It's kind of funny." I looked at her. "What is?" "The timing," she said. 5 years later, and now she sees it. I nodded. "Yeah." She smiled slightly. People notice when it's visible. That's usually when they show up. We both let that sit. Not as a statement. Just an observation. Later that evening, I stepped outside for a minute. The air was cooler. Quieter than the street during the day. I stood there near the edge of the driveway. Hands in my pockets. Not thinking about her. Not replaying anything. Just standing there. And I noticed something clearly. There was no version of that conversation that mattered anymore. Not because it wasn't real. Because it didn't connect to anything in my life now. It existed on its own. Separate. Finished. I went back inside. Closed the door behind me. Locked it. And didn't think about it again. Because there was nothing left in it for me. The next morning, I passed the billboard again. Same road. Same placement. Early enough that traffic was still light. The sky hadn't fully settled into daylight yet, just enough visibility to see everything clearly without it feeling bright. It stood out the same way it had before. Large. Clean. Positioned exactly where it needed to be. I didn't slow down. Didn't take a second look. Just glanced at it, then kept driving. Because it wasn't new to me. I had seen it before it went up. Approved the final version. Adjusted the placement. Sat in a meeting where we discussed the angle, the spacing, the visibility at different times of day. There was nothing unexpected about it. The only thing that had changed was who noticed it. The office was already active when I got in. 8:50. Lights on. 2 conversations happening near the entrance. Someone walking past with a folder in their hand. Moving quickly but not urgently. I set my bag down. Opened my laptop. Started going through emails. Same structure as every morning. What needs attention first? What can wait? What doesn't matter? There were 3 messages marked important. 1 from client. 1 internal. 1 from a partner asking for a quick adjustment before something went live. I handled all 3 within the first 20 minutes. No delay. No distraction. That part felt normal. Completely. Around 10:30, Daniel walked in. Coffee in hand. "Morning," he said. "Morning." He sat across from me for a second. "You've seen it again?" he asked. "The Billboard?" "Yeah." "I passed it." He nodded. "People are talking about it." "I know." He studied me for a moment, then said, "You're not reacting to it much." I shrugged slightly. "It's part of the work." He nodded. "Fair." That was the end of it. He didn't bring up the call. I didn't mention it, because it didn't belong in that conversation. That mattered. Around midday, I stepped out to grab coffee. Same place across the street. The person behind the counter looked up and said, "Busy week?" "Normal," I replied. She handed me the cup. "Looks like things are going well," she added. I didn't ask what she meant. Didn't need to. "They are," I said. That was enough. I walked back. Same route. Same pace. Nothing about the day had shifted. Not because nothing had happened. Because what happened didn't carry forward. In the afternoon, I had a call that ran longer than expected. Discussion about expanding into another market. Numbers. Timelines. Risk. The kind of conversation that requires attention. That's where my focus stayed. Not on the past. Not on the call from the day before. That part had already closed. Around 6:45, I was still at my desk. Most of the office had cleared out. A few lights still on. A chair left slightly out of place from where someone had been sitting earlier. I finished reviewing a document. Made 2 small changes. Sent it back. Closed the laptop. Sat there for a second. Not thinking about anything specific. Just finishing the day. Then I picked up my phone. Scrolled once. No messages. No missed calls. Nothing from her. And I noticed something clearly. I hadn't expected anything. Not even the background. There was no part of me waiting to see if she would call again. No curiosity about whether she would follow up. That door had already closed. Completely. On the drive home, I hit a red light just before the highway. The billboard was visible from that angle. Off to the right. Not centered. Just there. I looked at it for a second. Then back at the road. Because it didn't represent anything new. It represented what had already been built. Over time, quietly, when no one was paying attention. That was the difference. When I got home, Sarah was in the kitchen. Something cooking on the stove. The sound of it steady in the background. "Hey," she said. "Hey." I set my bag down. Walked over. Poured a glass of water. She glanced at me. "Long day. Normal." She nodded. "That's good." We stood there for a moment. Then she said, "You haven't mentioned the call again." "I don't need to." She looked at me. Then smiled slightly. "That's a good sign." I nodded. "It is." She leaned back against the counter. "Most people would have thought about that for a while." "I know. And you didn't." "No." She watched me for a second. Then said, "That means it doesn't matter anymore." I thought about that. Briefly. Then said, "It mattered when it happened." She nodded. "Yeah. But not now." She gave a small nod. "Good." That was the end of it. No deeper conversation. No need to analyze anything further. Because there was nothing to resolve. Later that night, I walked through the house turning off lights. Kitchen first. Then the hallway. Then the living room. Same routine. Same pace. I stopped near the front door for a second. Not because I heard anything. Just a moment. Then I locked it. Checked it once. And walked away. because there was nothing outside that needed to come back in, and nothing from before that needed to be revisited. That part was done, completely. The next morning started the same way the others had. 6:30, alarm, kitchen, coffee. I stood at the counter while it brewed, watching the same line of light come through the window. Nothing felt different. That was the first thing I noticed. After something like that, you expect a shift, a leftover thought, a second look at something that already happened. There was none of that. My son came in a few minutes later, still half asleep, sat down and asked, "Do we have cereal?" "Yes." He nodded, started eating. My daughter followed, slower, asking the same question she asks every morning. "Is it a school day?" "Yes." She paused like she might argue it, then didn't. Routine. Everything exactly where it should be. And that's when it settled in fully. Nothing from that call had followed me into this. It stayed where it happened. In the car. On that road. Exactly where it belonged. The day moved normally. Work in the morning. 2 meetings that mattered. 1 that didn't. Calls. Decisions. The kind of things that build something forward. Nothing pulled me back. Not once. Around midday, I stepped out again. Same place for coffee. Same person behind the counter. "Back again," she said. "Yeah." She handed me the cup. "You must be doing something right," she added. I nodded once. Just consistent. That was the most accurate answer. Because nothing about where I was had come from moment. It came from repetition. Time. Decisions made when nothing was visible. That part mattered more than anything she had said on that call. In the afternoon, I drove out to check on a site. One of the newer projects. Something that would have been out of reach 5 years earlier. I parked across the street. Sat there for a minute. Not thinking about the past. Just looking at what was in front of me. People moving in and out. Work being done. Something that was real. Something that held. That's when I thought about it again. Not her. The timing. The way she had left. The words she used. Stability. A plan. Someone who wasn't starting over. At the time, those words had weight. They stayed with me. Not because I agreed with them. Because I understood what they meant. Now, they didn't land the same way. Because I wasn't starting over anymore. I had already built something that didn't depend on anyone staying. That was the difference. That evening, I got home around 7. Sarah was already there. Dinner halfway done. The kitchen warm. The kind of quiet that comes from something already in motion. "Hey," she said. "Hey." I set my keys down. Washed my hands. Moved through the same routine. Nothing changed. At one point, she said, "You haven't brought it up again." "I don't need to." She nodded. I figured. We sat down to eat. My son started talking about something from school. My daughter interrupted him halfway through. Sarah told them both to slow down. Normal conversation. Nothing forced. Nothing interrupted. I listened. Answered when I needed to. Stayed exactly where I was. And I noticed something. There was no comparison happening. Not between then and now. Not between her and this. Because they didn't belong in the same space. One was part of something that ended. The other was what existed now. That was enough. Later that night, after the kids were in bed, Sarah and I sat in the living room. No television, just the low light from the lamp. She looked at me and said, "You handled that well." I nodded. "I didn't do anything." "You did," she said. "You didn't reopen something that didn't belong anymore." I thought about that for a second, then said, "There wasn't anything there to reopen." She smiled slightly. Exactly. That was the point. Not restraint. Not control. Just absence. Of anything that needed to be revisited. A few days later, I passed the billboard again. Different time of day. More traffic. More people seeing it. I looked at it for a second longer this time. Not because it meant something new. Because I understood what it represented. Not success in the way people talk about it. Just evidence. Of time. Of consistency. Of decisions made when no one was watching. And I realized something clearly. The best response to what she said wasn't what I told her on the phone. It was everything that happened after she left. That's what made the difference. If there's one thing I took from that call, it's simple. Some people are there for what your life looks like, not what it actually is. And when that changes, they leave. When it changes again, they come back. You don't need to respond to that emotionally. You just need to recognize it and keep your life exactly the way you built it. Because the best outcome isn't proving them wrong. It's building something so complete that their return doesn't matter. If that felt familiar to you, you're already in the right place. Subscribe and tell me this. Have you ever had someone leave when things were falling apart and come back when they weren't? What did you do? There's another story I want to share with you. Because sometimes the most powerful response is having nothing left to say at all.